Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, John and Lee proudly present the greatest wrestling show ever!
Okay, guys, welcome to the 15th and final episode of the greatest wrestling show ever. And we're into the main event. We're going to get cracking on it straight away because it's quite a long one. And I put my youngest son on Frozen 2 to keep him distracted. So it's Money in the Bank 2011 pay-per-view on the WWE Network. It's just before the Cena Punk chapter because we want to see the build-up to it. It's 1 hour, 59 minutes and 7 seconds in. Pressing play in 3, 2, 1. Off we go. So what are your thoughts, Lee, about this being the main event of the biggest wrestling show ever?
It's quite possibly the best wrestling match I've ever seen. So
it is. It's a fantastic match. Part of me feels that almost the main event should probably really be like a WrestleMania main event, but that's not the criteria really we set, I suppose, is it? So.
No. And this as well is the only match of CM Punk's I've ever seen.
Really? You've never seen any other Punk matches at all?
No, none.
I suppose he was long gone by the time you got back into wrestling, and you were long out of it by the time he got in.
Yeah.
Yeah, he left shortly after Royal Rumble 2014, said he was retired. Everyone doubted him, but that's now, 7 years ago? You know, he's been gone nearly as long as someone like Edge was, gone longer than about the same amount that The Rock was gone. You know, 7 years is a long time. Not many people come back after longer than that.
So you got a bit of backstory leading up to this match?
Yeah, so I wasn't watching quite as much. You know, I say the modern era, this is still 10 years ago. The modern era is a little bit more patchy for me than, say, the late 90s are. My understanding that a lot of this feud was based off Punk in reality and his character feeling somewhat disrespected, feeling that he wasn't the face of WWE as he should be, and someone like John Cena was. You just saw there him sat cross-legged on stage. That was from a famous interview he gave, which has been referred to as the pipe bomb, where after a match, there you go, you can see him sat down cross-legged and waving. After a match on Raw, it must have been, he took the microphone, went and sat on the stage and cut a promo, which very much blurred the lines of fiction and reality. So he broke the fourth wall. He talked directly to the camera, which they never do. He referenced things that wouldn't normally be referenced. So he said hi to Colt Cabana, one of his real life best friend from his time in Ring of Honor. He referenced Ring of Honor. He called Triple H a dumbass, if I remember correctly. Said that WWF would be better when Vince died and things like that. Whilst it was clearly all agreed, because if it genuinely gone off script, they'd have cut the camera instantly. It did very much make you question the extent of it. There's a lot of people at the time who thought it was completely genuine. Some who thought it was a bit of both. It was very cleverly done. It seemed very real. Yeah, it's an interesting, different build-up to this match here. There's a lot again of real life animosity and feeling underpinning it, and often the best wrestling stories are reality, maybe dialed up a little bit. But when you can tell it's just a work of fiction, it doesn't have quite the same level of buy-in that feels real.
So I take it Cena comes into this because he was, I take it, the poster boy for WWE and sort
very
of
much, yeah, had been for a number of years. And Punk, I don't think, according to his promo at least, which I think reflected his real feelings, I don't think he disliked Cena on a personal level. I think he liked him, but didn't like the fact that he was seen as the poster boy because he, Punk, felt that he was more deserving of that. He felt that Cena was a bit of an arse kisser or ass kisser, as you pronounce it. I think he referenced in the pipe bomb promo Dwayne, as in The Rock Johnson, being a world-class ass kisser, and that's why he got to where he was. So again, very much blurred the lines between fiction and reality. And I think as well at that point, there's definitely almost a bit of an undercurrent building amongst the WWE fan base of this rebellious nature, not wanting to cheer and follow who you've been told to. You know, the pushed golden boy, standard vanilla-ish, great physique bodybuilder type that they've been given for years and years. and they wanted to get behind someone they considered a bit more of an underdog.
Yeah.
And Punk and then Daniel Bryan a few years later were very much those sort of characters that people felt were getting to where were getting to the level they were getting to, based purely off their skill and from the support of the audience, as opposed to being picked and pushed. But again, it blurs the lines, because ultimately Punk has been pushed to get to this point. You know, you don't just get there purely on your skill, and also it's not like Cena and The Rock didn't have any skill. That they were given both the push and had the ability to back it up, as do anyone that makes it to this level.
Yeah, yeah.
So Punk wearing his T-shirt there, that was quite a high-selling bit of merchandise at the time, if I remember correctly. I remember shortly after this as well, so it would have been late 2011, Kevin Nash comes in for one final run in WWE, and he says that Cena looks like a short order, not Cena, Punk looks like a short order cook. To be honest, you can't really disagree with that.
So if I remember rightly, was this event in Punk's hometown, Chicago?
Yeah,
Was it from Chicago?
was. Yeah, so that again, it's perhaps that perfect storm of combination of factors. So Punk is very much the heel in this arrangement, and Cena the babyface. But they've got the pay-per-view coming up in Punk's hometown of Chicago. Punk genuinely, his contract was due to expire at midnight that night.
Right.
Now, I don't know the specifics of. I can only assume that he had signed a new contract, because obviously the storyline then continued to play out, but it was genuine that his contract was due to expire. So again, blurring the lines, that some people did feel that perhaps was he really going to take the title and leave?
Yeah.
It was cleverly done. Again, it was that partly fortune that these things happened to sort of come into place, but they obviously then played it well. And
yeah, the best works are always the works that when you question, was it a work, I suppose.
Of course, yeah. It always has to have that reality feeling to it as well, because ultimately, to me, that's what the best wrestling match is about. You care who wins for some reason, and when it's just a good match, as in they're doing a sequence of good moves, that's cool, but there's only so much entertainment you can get from that, and you probably wouldn't ever watch it back again. But when it's a situation where you and or the crowd and other people care about the result and what happens, that makes for the best wrestling.
So is this sat cross-legged in the middle of the ring his thing?
Yeah, I remember him doing it a lot. I can't particularly remember if he'd done it much before the pipe bomb interview. Maybe he did. My particular image of him being sat cross-legged is sat on the stage doing that pipe bomb. One of the ironies from the pipe bomb interview is he references his real life best friend Colt Cabana, who, funnily enough, I know. He wrestled over in England for a little while. They were best mates from their days as a tag team, the Second City Saints, I think it was in Ring of Honor mainly. But a number of years after this, they had a big falling out. So after Punk left WWE, after Royal Rumble 2014, a while later he appeared on Cabana's podcast, which is nearly as good as this one, The Art of Wrestling, discussing the situation related to him leaving. And in it, he made a number of comments related to being forced to wrestle against his will, because he felt he shouldn't be, because he had was it a large inflammation or something on his hip or something like that? And he questioned one of the WWE's doctors and made various other comments. And then Cabana and Punk were both sued by that doctor and whoever else it was over the comments made on the podcast. Punk had apparently said to Cabana that he'd sort it out, but then, suing's like in America, ends up running up massive costs, and seemingly, again, I don't quite know the exact specifics, but Cabana was left significantly out of pocket and felt that Punk didn't do what he'd promised to do in helping him out with it, because Punk ultimately is a multi-millionaire. Cabana struggled to make a living on the independent scene, or maybe not struggled, but he's not made the same amount of money. And they had a big falling out. And for many, many years, best friends. My understanding now is that they are no longer that, shall we say.
So sort of Cena stood outside the ring there Punk clapping Cena. I don't know if he's sort of doing that in a sarcastic way or...
Yeah, I guess he would be. Yeah, I
Mm,
assume so.
I couldn't tell right away. So is this the first time that spoiler alert, but first time that Punk wins the WWE Championship?
No, it's not. So, working backwards in my head, Punk comes in about 2006. He becomes a member of the ECW roster. He wins the ECW world title for however much that counts. The weekend that Chris Benoit kills his wife and kid. No, actually, that's wrong. Sorry. He was due to wrestle Benoit for it that weekend for the vacant title, if I remember correctly. Benoit kills his wife and kid and then himself. No shows that pay per view. This is summer of 2007. So they go instead with John Morrison versus Punk for the basic vacant title. Morrison wins it, but then Punk wins it from him a few months later. So that, in theory, is his first WWE title. It's the ECW one for what that means. Then about a year later, I think it would be around summer 2000, Punk wins Money in the Bank at WrestleMania in 2008, wins the title from Edge, so that's his first sort of WWE title proper, summer 2008. He then loses it in a gauntlet match in, I want to say, about September 2008, but doesn't even actually get to compete in the match. Randy Orton attacks him backstage, punts him, and he's eliminated from the match, meaning that the match then essentially is not for the vacant title, but the winner of the match gets the title.
Yeah.
He definitely then wins it a second time. He wins Money in the Bank again, 2009, the only person to win back-to-back Money in the Banks. And I forget who he... Oh, no, Jeff Hardy. Summer of 2009, he wins the title from Jeff Hardy.
Okay.
So he's definitely had at least two before this. As you say, spoiler alert, he wins it here. He then wins it again a couple of months later, having it gone a bit back and forth between Alberto Del Rio ends up with it at some point over this summer, but he wins it back probably autumn 2011 for the start of his record-breaking, at least in the modern era, title reign. He holds it for something like, I think, 450 days before losing it to The Rock in February 2013.
Wow, that's unheard of at the moment.
So the irony is that, Punk feels disrespected and not pushed and all that, but, already at this point he's a two-time world champion about to become...
Well, that's what I suspected, yeah, based on what you were saying earlier. But yeah, well...
It's all relative. I mean, I get what Punk says, that, someone like Cena is pushed as the poster boy ahead of him, but then if I was Vince and co, I probably would do the same. Like, Punk's a great worker, he's fantastic on the microphone, he's a brilliant all-rounder. Is he the one you build your company around?
Well, just look at Cena. I mean,
exactly.
I think the kids have been more naturally drawn to John Cena.
Yeah, Kevin Nash's reference to Punk looking like a short order cook, is fairly accurate. Kevin Nash is brilliant. Do you remember Kevin Nash from Mean Diesel, presumably in the early 90s? Yeah,
Big Daddy Cool.
Yeah, exactly. He's a funny guy. He quite dismissive of vanilla midgets, as he calls them, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he often says it in a funny way.
Yeah. I saw an interview with John Cena once. I remember he was saying two of those common questions he gets asked are, what's his real name?
Yeah.
And or why did he choose such a boring wrestling name? So every time he has to explain, no, that is what I'm called.
Whilst in some ways is a bit of a boring name, it is at least unique to him, and it could be, I don't know, it could be like Kevin Smith or something like that.
Yeah.
It does have an element of, Cena particularly is an unusual surname. I think if it was John something else, it wouldn't work quite as well, but...
Yeah. So CM, does CM stand for Chicago Made, or is that just a fun thing?
Chick Magnet.
Are you serious?
Yeah, so I thought this was going to be one of your questions. So Punk was in a tag team in the early noughties with somebody else, and they were called the Chick Magnets. He was CM Punk, and the other one was CM something else, and I can't remember what it was. And I was just thinking, just before we came on, I bet Lee asks me as a question, what does CM stand for? And I was going to go Chick Magnet. And I thought, from a bonus point, you might ask, what was the other member of the Chick Magnets tag team? And I was half tempted to Google it because I couldn't remember, but I didn't do that.
I have got a tag team related question, CM
Oh.
Punk, but it might be different.
Go on, hit me with it. Way there.
It was, who did CM Punk team up with to win his first tag team championship?
In WWE,
Yeah.
he definitely won one with Evan Bourne. Anything before that? Did he win one with Kofi as well? I'm not sure.
Are you asking me or telling me?
Yeah, again, this time period, I didn't particularly watch on a regular basis, so it's just kind of what I saw on the internet and what have you. I'm going to go Kofi.
Bastard.
Yes! What a result. Happy with that.
Well played. And do you know what John Cena's first singles championship in the WWE was?
US title, won from the Big Show at WrestleMania 19.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
So Cena, again, this is another one that people kind of retcon a little bit, but Cena has addressed himself in documentaries and stuff, is people remember Cena coming in summer 2002, doing his rapper gimmick and getting over to a degree. And then by WrestleMania in 2014, he's US champion. WrestleMania in 2015, he's world champion. And people kind of remember that it was this almost like constant march to the top. But actually, from sort of mid to late 2002 onwards, he was struggling a bit. He wasn't getting over with the crowd. There was some suggestion from some in management that it wasn't going to work out for him, and that, you know, if things hadn't have changed in that sort of 2013 period, then actually he may have been one of those that not only didn't make it to the level he did, but didn't even carry on with the company, apparently.
Wow. So who was he kind of up against at the same time, sort of competing with for the big time?
Well, that 2002 was the big intake of the OVW graduates in himself, Shelton Benjamin, Lesnar, Batista, and Orton. So probably at that point, in terms of the new ones, I mean, Lesnar was pushed straight to the top. Lesnar was champion by SummerSlam 2002. Orton was very much seen as a face of the future. Batista, I assume they saw big plans in him, but at that point he was just Devon Dudley's assistant, associate, whatever you call it. You'd also got, in fact, to be honest, 2002 in some ways was quite a prime year for talent, because you've still got the tail end of a lot of the 90s talent. You've got most of the WCW guys that were going to come in have come in by then. So you've got Hall, Nash, Hogan, Flair. You've got still the Rock's around. Yeah, it's a bit of a part-timer, but he's still around. Austin's still around just.
So a lot to compete with them.
Yeah, you've got Undertaker still. There's a lot. Perhaps some of them you don't realise, you know, because they're early on in the career, like you're seen as your Ortons, etc. But there's a lot of current or future Hall of Famers knocking around in 2002.
Wow. Right, okay, so this question, this is one of those where you either know it or you don't, as in it's not, you can't even just guess. What moment in WWE history did CM Punk say inspired him to join the wrestling business?
Right, okay, well, I don't know. I will have a guess. So let me think. So I'm presuming he's relatively young at that point. I think he's a similar-ish age to us, roughly. So I'm guessing it's the early to mid-90s. If it's something to do with Chicago, WrestleMania 13 was in Chicago. Was he at WrestleMania 13 or watched it or something like that?
I'll give you a clue. You're going the wrong way. It's something that happened on Piper's Pit.
Snooker with a coconut to the head?
Yes.
That's all that happened in Piper's Pit that I can remember. I'll tell you what's quite interesting. Speaking of the likes of snooker and all that, every now and again, seeing some old shows from the 80s or reading about them. I've got a series of books I occasionally read at bedtime just because it's quite mindless entertainment. It's just reviewing old years or old shows from the 80s and 90s. Just 5 minutes of that I find it's great for helping me go to sleep. And it references this quite a lot in there, and I've seen it on some of the shows that I've looked back on. Back in the 80s, ethnic or black wrestlers always had really hard heads, didn't they? Do you remember? So like the Head Shrinkers, the Wild Samoans, Jimmy Snooker, and anyone really who wasn't white, part of their gimmick was they had a really hard head. So
I've never even realised that, but now that you say it,
you remember it, don't you? Really, like you remember the white wrestler would headbutt the non-white wrestler, and then immediately kind of realise the error of their ways because it would hurt them a lot more than the other guy. But the daft thing is, as well, looking back and having read it in these books as well, is it only seemed to start applying at certain parts of the match. So it was almost like the hard head had to be activated. Early in the match, they'd be punching the non-white wrestler in the head and it'd be absolutely fine. And all of a sudden, it would become clear that the non-white wrestler had a hard head. And next time they went to punch him, it would really hurt their hand. But they'd already punched him 20 times before and it wasn't a problem. You just hadn't quite established the hard-headed bit at that point in the match.
That's brilliant.
It's funny, well, one thing you do in wrestling is as part of the match, you might establish something. So if it's you might establish, if it's a crowd that don't know you, who is the face and heel. You know, for the first few minutes, you might make that really clear in what you're doing.
Yeah.
You might tease your finisher. So it's establishing that this movement, this thing seems to be this guy's finishing move. It might be things that you want to establish for the crowd. And that might be something that you plan with your opponent beforehand. So, yeah, we need to establish who's face and heel. We need to establish this, get that over with the audience. Presumably, at some point, the white and non-white wrestler had a conversation where we need to establish that you've got a hard head. Well, I've got a hard head. Maybe it was their choice. Maybe they,
And then decide
it. It's funny, there's a lot of gimmicks from that age that haven't really aged all that well, have they? So, you know, remember Kamala?
Yeah.
Kamala died recently. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
So, obviously, that gimmick wouldn't play well in the modern era. But the ultimate irony there is Kamala's real name was James Harris. The soon-to-be Vice President of America is called Kamala Harris. So apparently a large number of references to James Kamala Harris have now been, I don't know what it is, blocked or something like that, because people have found them and think it's almost a piss take of the soon-to-be Vice President.
Right.
A big fat black man with stars on his belly and a moon on his head in her place. Which is, an interesting coincidence. I actually read something the other day, actually quite interesting, speaking of Kamala. So, did you used to watch World of Sport wrestling at all in the mid to late 80s?
Yeah, like Big Daddy and them, yeah?
Yeah. So I was aware that it went off TV in 1988. I knew that. And I knew that for a number of months or however long it was before that, it'd been a rotation. I think it'd been 2 years, a rotation every third week of Joint Promotions, which is the one that had the monopoly on ITV for about 30 years, 1 week. Then the next week would be All Star Pro Wrestling, which still runs today, was the company that I worked predominantly for, run by Brian Dixon from Merseyside. And then the third week would be WWF. And that was part of the nail in the head for British wrestling, because all of a sudden you'd have 2 out of 3 weeks with, whilst they were great wrestlers, they were often somewhat middle-aged, not great physique looking, standard looking English guys. And then every third week you'd have bronzed, muscle-bound Americans and music and lights and all that. But the thing I read the other day was the first week of WWF on ITV, the matches chosen to be put on, they were actually a mixture. They weren't particularly new matches. They were from the previous few years, but they hadn't happened that month. One of which was the British Bulldogs versus the Hart Foundation. Makes sense. One of which was a Kamala match, because Kamala had only a couple of years before been wrestling on the UK scene and had been on ITV as, I think it was a Sugar Bear Harris or something like that.
Right.
And then I forget what the other match was, but all the matches selected to be on that involved WWF wrestlers who had some sort of connection to the British scene.
Yeah.
You can imagine if you were a British fan in 1986, 1 week you turned on and you watched Les Kellett in his, with his pasty body and swimming trunks doing his comedy, as was. or Mick McManus, who a fantastic wrestler as he was, must have been well into his 50s or more at that point. And then the next week, you've got Davey, Dynamite, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and Bret Hart in probably what was an absolutely cracking match.
Yeah.
You've got, I think it was Hogan and Savage, house show match.
Oh, wow.
On there as well. You could see, that was a nasty landing there. Punk went for a dive across off the top rope. Cena's legs weren't in quite the right position, so Punk landed belly first on Cena's legs, which I think hurt both of them by the looks of it.
Yeah, he was genuinely hit his leg there, wasn't he?
Yeah, probably hurt Punk as well, because that's like a really hard knee to the belly, for want of a better description. We're doing what we normally do. We're not talking about the match in the slightest, are we?
Well, that's
to be fair, it's quite hard to talk about a match, the duration of it, without just describing.
We always said we were never going to commentate.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, completely. That makes sense then with the WWF thing, sort of putting the nail in the coffin for.
I think it did. I think it was a mixture of reasons, but I think that definitely was a massive contributing factor, and you can see why. I mean, I don't really remember that. I vaguely remember watching World of Sport. I don't really remember ever seeing any WWF on ITV. I don't know if it was anything to do with the different regions, because I remember at that point there was very much a regional thing. You know, you'd have Granada region or whatever your region was. So it may have varied region to region.
Yeah, I remember Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks then came to Mac Leisure Centre once.
Did they really?
Yeah.
I've got a funny story about Giant Haystacks and Mac Leisure Centre. Actually, I'll tell you in a second. But go on, tell us about you seeing Daddy and Haystacks at Mac.
Oh, I didn't see them. I had no interest in them. I didn't know they came. But Mick McManus, I got a letter from Mick McManus once. I wrote to him and he wrote me back.
Oh yeah. What did you write to him? What did he say?
He wrote an article, and it might have been in a WWF magazine, or it might have been in one of those cheaper ones that we mentioned before. And I wrote to him. I can't even remember what I wrote. But yeah, he wrote me back.
Yeah. What did he say? Do you remember? Just saying thank you for the letter or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think he was pretty much agreeing with whatever I was saying.
Did you say he was brilliant?
I didn't even really know who he was. He just wrote an article in this magazine that I used to get monthly. I think my mum knew more who he was than I did.
Did you write to him and say, you definitely don't look like an old man in your swimming trunks? And he was like, you're correctly sure, well done.
But it must have been WWF related.
No, I was about to say that when you said that. As far as I know, McManus has never done anything with WWF at all. And even if he had done something when he happened to be in America at some point, which I don't think he did, I don't think he'd have ever made a WWF magazine. Can't have been.
I mean, well, more mean my letter. But anyway, he might have written in this English magazine and obviously referenced this. The magazine it was one of those magazines that covered all wrestling.
Okay.
Yeah. So go on, tell me your Giant Haystack story.
So I've wrestled at Mac Leisure Centre twice. The second time you came to 3 years ago. The first time was my last match as a regular. Even to be honest, by that point I've been really cutting down for the last few years. So it's about October, November 2014. I saw that I forget his name now. One of the other promoters that I used to work for. His name will come to me in a minute. Oh, Ian McGregor. Ian McGregor runs shows around the Northwest, very much under the radar. He's drawn big crowds for many, many years, and very few people have ever heard of him. I remember actually in 2008 reading online someone saying, what is the biggest crowd in British wrestling since the World of Sport days? And some people coming on going, oh, so-and-so drew 1,000 and these people drew 1,200. And I felt like going on and going, well, I wrestled at Manchester Velodrome for McGregor last weekend and there's 3,500 people there. Very much flew under the radar because no internet presence, just family shows. But anyway, I think I walked into Mac Leisure Centre and saw a banner up there for wrestling, and I realised from the banner it was Ian McGregor's show, so I rang him up. I've been thinking for the last few years about maybe calling it a day. I thought it's a perfect opportunity. I don't want to just carry on and look back one day and realise I've not had a match in a couple of years. I want to be some sort of actual last match. I thought it's a perfect opportunity. So I did that show, my last match there, but while we were there, I was chatting to Ian, the promoter, and he said he'd wrestled at Mac Leisure Centre many times in the past, but not for quite a long time. And the last time they'd wrestled at Mac Leisure Centre, which I think he maybe was early 90s or something like that, Haystacks had walked out through the same door that I walked out, and there's a giant light shining in his face, and he just bellows out, "Oh, fucking hell, turn that fucking light off." Complete silence. The entire crowd went silent. And he walks the ring as all the parents are like covering their kids' ears and what have you.
Excellent. So what was that? So what was that like then? Wrestling in front of 3,500 people. That's more.
Well,
than
it was a bit weird actually. So it was at Velodrome, and it was organised by Ian McGregor in conjunction with a guy called Mickey Francis. Now, Mickey Francis is a well-known. I don't really know what he is, but in East Manchester area, particularly amongst Man City fans, he's very well known. He wrestled as the Governor. Undertones of him being involved in somewhat illegal practices, and that's kind of why he's well known. I don't know the exact specifics, but Mickey decided he wanted to run a show at the Velodrome and draw 5,000. So I think the big crowd was largely based off him being involved in it.
Yeah.
I think he pushed it in his network of Man City fans and what have you. So they didn't get the 5,000 they would have liked. They got 3,500. And whilst it was quite cool in some ways, the Velodrome isn't really a setup designed for wrestling. So the ring was in the middle on that flat bit, and then a load of chairs around that, which were fairly full. But then the majority of the seating is on the outside of the track.
Of course.
So that bit then ends up being, let's say, a third full, and everyone's spread out quite a lot. So actually, for the actual seating bit, there's far more empty seats than there are full seats. And a lot of those people are a good, without exaggeration, 50, 60, 70 metres away from you.
Yeah.
Gap in between. So whilst it was quite cool in some ways, I've wrestled in front of crowds of, say, 2,500 in an actual venue where everyone's tight packed around it, and that's way better for wrestling.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was similar actually for Brian Dixon and All Star that I wrestled for. I've wrestled in front of crowds of, not 3,500, but definitely 2,500 several times for him over the years. And that wasn't on most people's radar. They were picking out, 800 people shows where, Brian never had a show of less than 800 people.
Right.
Oh, Punk's flipped out of the, not the FU, what's it called? Attitude adjustment. It was originally called the FU, but obviously that's a bit rude. So he changed that.
So do you know who ruptured CM Punk's eardrum and broke his nose when he was wrestling in OVW?
In OVW. Right. So time frame wise, it's got to be around about 05, 06. And I presume it's someone I will have heard of, not a random. So who would be in OVW in 05 and 06? I don't know.
Danny Inferno.
Oh, right, okay. Fine. I did not. No? Don't even know who he is. He's not also somebody else. He's not known under another name, is he?
Sure.
Fun fact for you.
It's not one that you should have got then.
What's that? Sorry.
So it's not one that you should have got.
No, I think unless I just happen to know it, but I don't know. A little CM Punk fact for you related to John Cena as well. So Punk had signed for WWE it would have been 2005. So it would be WrestleMania 2006, WrestleMania 22. So it would have been Cena defending against Triple H, if I remember correctly. And Cena is carried to the ring by a number of OVW wrestlers, essentially extras at that point, in a like gangster style entrance. And one of the people carrying Cena is Punk.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's sort of I think that's referenced in the build-up to this match, actually. It's come from being someone who carries him to the ring to being his contemporary, his peer. There you go, Punk with a springboard. I did a springboard in my match at the Leisure Centre that you came to and fell off the ropes. Thankfully, I managed to fall into my opponent, so it didn't look too bad, but it wasn't the move I would have gone for. I'm glad as well. My last regular match, the one I did at Mac Leisure Centre in 2014, I hit a springboard RKO for the finish. You've obviously seen the video. I'd been needing to do it for years and years, and I thought it's my last chance to do it. I'd actually done it the weekend before on a show I did in St Helens, just to check I could do it, and I did. So I ticked the box, but that would have been somewhat embarrassing if in my very last move as a regular wrestler, I just fell. And to be honest, it hurt like hell. But when it's the last move you're ever going to do, you might as well go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Who did John Cena face at Survivor Series 2008?
Oh, that's a period of time I'm not very good at. So, he feuded with Edge a lot around that 07, 08 period. I'm going to say Edge.
Chris Jericho.
Okay.
And what was the name of John Cena's debut rap album?
Debut rap album?
Yeah.
Thug Life, Thugonomics, something like that.
Yeah, it's very guessable. It's John Cena.
You Can't See Me.
Correct.
Yes. For those who can't see Lee, he did the hand signal in front of his face there. So I was just about to mention there, Cena had Punk trapped in his STF, which he cleverly used to call the STFU, if you know what that stands for.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Oh.
Well, STF is step over toe hold face lock. STFU is shut the up.
Yeah.
So he used to call it STFU when he was a heel early on, and I think he mainly used it because he kind of fit the gimmick. But he was always terrible at applying the STF. It looked the least painful thing. He didn't have his leg around his opponent's leg in a position that would cause any sort of leverage on it. He wasn't particularly pulling hard on their upper body. It looked like he was just kind of lying across their back and gently holding their face.
Yeah.
That was always the charge against Cena. I like Cena. He's been involved in a lot of great matches. In some ways, he's a great worker. Fantastic on the microphone. Definitely in the top 10 or so of all time. But so many things he does, just to me, kind of let his act down. That STF's a little bit better, the one he's applying now. But the fact that his STF looks rubbish, the fact that his 5-knuckle shuffle looks like it misses every single time, and he's got lots of little bits in there that just take you out of it. You're constantly thinking, oh, that was a bit crap. But it was all pointless stuff that he could just make look so much better with minimal change.
Yeah.
A strange one Cena is. I don't know, I rate him, I think he's brilliant. But then I don't know how many matches I've watched of his where I've really got into them compared to some other wrestlers.
So the move where he falls down on them with a fist to the head. That's called 5-knuckle shuffle.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still called that, but it definitely was early on in his career. But it looks like it misses them every time, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So Punk switched that now into the Anaconda Vice. The Anaconda Vice is one of my moves I use on the kids sometimes. If I'm wrestling Charlie, for example, slap the Anaconda Vice on him because it's a move that you can put on and not hurt them in the slightest unless you actually pull on it. Yeah, it used to be when I used to wrestle Izzy, she's not bothered about wrestling anymore, but I'd get her in the Anaconda Vice and she would reverse it into her finisher, which was called the Snail Lock, which would involve me being like kind of on all fours, and she'd sit on my back and legs either side of my head and squeeze, essentially ever so gently, but I would invariably tap out to it.
Excellent. Yeah, I land her in the full Nelson quite often.
I bet. So at some point, in fact, we spoke about John Laurinaitis last week. He's going to come out at some point relatively soon with Vince McMahon, because in storyline, Vince is worried that Punk is going to win the title and escape with it. John Laurinaitis, aka Johnny Ace, the inventor of the Ace Crusher, what would become known as the Stone Cold Stunner and the Diamond Cutter years later, at this point is an on-screen character. And was for a couple of years after this, ironically, John Laurinaitis nearly ended up being John Cena's father-in-law. So, you know the Bellas?
Yes.
John Laurinaitis married relatively recently, maybe 10 years ago, but as an adult, Brie and Nikki Bella's mum.
Okay.
And John Cena was engaged to and going to marry Nikki Bella. And Daniel Bryan has married and is married to Brie Bella.
Yeah.
So John Cena and Daniel Bryan would have been brother-in-laws, and John Laurinaitis would have been their father-in-law.
Well.
Yeah. All right, Punk signaling for the go to sleep now. I think we are starting to nearing the end of the match. I think Laurinaitis and Vince will be coming out soon. So I don't know if you know that after this match, obviously Punk does win, and he does disappear off with the title. And for a few days, it does look, I mean, you kind of know it's a work, but it does look like they're really going through with the storyline. So if I remember correctly, Punk appears at Comic-Con or something like that, because he's into comics and all that. He appears there with the title belt, very much acting as though he's left the promotion. I think he might appear at some independent wrestling show.
So is he carrying the John Cena belt?
Yeah, the spinner belt he's taken with him. So he appears at some sort of independent wrestling show. So it looks like they're going through with it. But then it's pretty much all over this side of the storyline within a couple of weeks because, if I remember correctly, they have on possibly the next night or maybe 8 days later, they have a match for the vacant title, which does Rey Mysterio win it at the start of the show and then lose it to Cena at the end of the night, meaning he's got something like a 90-minute world title reign. And then the following week, Punk comes back to stare down Cena to then have a title versus title rematch to decide who the real champion is. So within literally 8 days, or maybe it was 15 days, this whole Punk leaving storyline is essentially over, and everyone realizes it was a work.
Yeah.
Compared to a generation ago, and I completely get why it is, but compared to a generation ago, there is very little in the way of drawing things out. Storylines don't last months or years very often anymore. It's sometimes over in a matter of weeks, which I get because the amount of content they've got to fill is exponentially more than it ever was.
Yeah.
If you had something like Hogan versus Randy Savage now, the actual amount of angles that went into that was maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5. There was the hours, there was the backstage brawl, all that sort of stuff. Now, if they were wrestling on Raw and SmackDown every week, that amount of content would have fitted into a fortnight.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's definitely near a conclusion. It is a loud crowd, that. Definitely well into it. You got any more quiz questions for me?
Do you remember who John Cena fought in his WWE TV debut?
Kurt Angle.
Yeah.
Angle cut a promo asking basically people to step it up, and he wanted people to come out and show some ruthless aggression. And Cena answered that challenge, came out and slapped him in the face and said that he was going to show ruthless aggression. And I think that strong debut, followed by a few years later him being the world champion, is kind of what people think happened, that he was off to the races and carried on straight up there. But actually, I think he faltered quite a bit, as I said earlier, after that debut, and only rebuilt himself the following year.
Right.
Interesting to know, over the years, there's been various. The Rock was the same. So when The Rock came in as Blue Chipper Rocky Maivia in Survivor Series 96, only a handful of months later he was struggling, and apparently there was a lot of talk that it wasn't working out and it wasn't going to happen. So again, imagine if The Rock and Cena hadn't changed things up a little bit, there'd just be footnotes in history as people that came in for 6 or 12 months, two of their biggest stars ever. Cena and Rock are the main event of the highest selling pay-per-view ever. I can't remember, they wrestled 2 consecutive WrestleManias. I think it was the second one, the one shortly after. So Punk holds the world title for however many days, loses it to The Rock. The Rock then loses it to Cena at WrestleMania in what I think is the most purchased pay-per-view ever, if I remember correctly. The WrestleMania 29 in 2013, but from the following year onwards, they'd introduced the network, which they've I think they've tried to say that WrestleMania since have had higher viewing figures because pretty much everyone that's got the network will watch at least some of WrestleMania, and it's got 1 point something million subscribers. And then of international buys on pay-per-view. So their argument is that it's more viewed than ever, but whether you can compare that directly to pay-per-view buys or not is questionable. So here we go. We've got Vince and John Laurinaitis have come out. So that's Johnny Ace on the right there of those two. Look how wide Vince is. For an old man, he's got some muscle mass and there. Definitely aged a lot these last 10 years, Vince, and I know everyone has, obviously, but he looks in fantastic shape there. But last few times I've seen him on WWE TV, he looks a bit like a lost old man, doesn't he?
Oh, he looks. Yeah.
There we go. Right, so
it looks like an old man who's trying to.
So Vince sent John
like an old man who's trying
to ring the bell in a screw job attempt, but Cena's rolled out, clotheslined him down. I think this is really now coming up to the finish. Cena said he doesn't want to do it that way. He wants to win fair and square rather than the match won for him.
That's what I was going to ask. So this is McMahon trying to do Punk over, but Cena's having none of it.
Exactly that, yeah. There we go. This is the finish now. Punk's got him up to the go to sleep. Boom. I always like the way that Punk did the pin from the go to sleep. So you see there that he grapevines the legs, the left leg with his legs, as well as hooking the right leg with both arms. It's a nice tight pin rather than just hitting your move and then vaguely falling on top of him.
Yeah.
There we go. So Punk has won the title. I've remembered now actually what does happen to the title after this. So SummerSlam this year, a few months after this, is Punk versus Cena. Punk ends up with the title afterwards, but then Alberto Del Rio, who's just won the Money in the Bank contract earlier this night, comes out and beats Punk for the title. It's then a couple of months later when Punk wins it back. I think if I remember correctly, in a three-way with Alberto Del Rio and possibly Ryback. That's when he starts that record-breaking title reign.
Wow.
The longest title reign since Hogan's 4-year one for his first title reign. The longest title reign in the modern era, they call it. Well, I think one of Brock Lesnar's Universal title reigns since has beat that, I think. He's had one that was definitely well over a year.
Well, Bailey, how long was she? I think she went over a year, or was it just under a year?
I think it was, if it was over a year, it wasn't by much. I think it might have been just shy of a year.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got Vince now. He's getting on the microphone. He's wanting Alberto Del Rio to come out now and cash in now. Yeah, he's saying send out Del Rio. Have you seen Del Rio over the last few years?
No.
He's turned into a bit of a maniac. He potentially always was. But he had a tumultuous relationship with Paige that made a lot of press. Definitely a lot of things going on there. He's since been arrested a few times. His mugshots clearly suggest that he's very heavily into his drugs. From being in fantastic shape and looking amazing. I mean, I know this is 10 years ago, but only a few years after this, he was still looking pretty good. But now he looks like a drug-addled old man. It's a shame.
That's a shame.
Right, so Punk's nullified Del Rio's attempt to cash in, and he is taking the title. He's off home with it. Vince is going to have it all. Good match, that. Cracking match. You got any more questions for me?
There's one more. When the WWE went to Iraq during Christmas 2003, who did Cena face off with and eventually defeat?
2003. I seem to remember him doing something with Santa Claus one year. I don't know if that was then or years later. I'm going to go... it's just a guess. Booker T.
Big Show.
Big Show. Yeah, that makes sense. Right, that is the pay-per-view is ending there. That's one thing we've done a couple of times over the last few years. You know, when the graphic appears on screen, the copyright graphic, that signifies the end of the show. A couple of times recently, they've had something happen after that graphic has come up, which I thought was quite a powerful way to take you by surprise. So when DIY split up a few years ago, when Tommaso Ciampa turned on Johnny Gargano, it was after they'd lost the match. They were heading to the back. The graphic appeared on screen, so you very much thought it was over. And then all of a sudden, Ciampa attacks Gargano and gives him a bit of a kicking, which really made it feel like it came out of nowhere because you'd essentially switched off to any idea that something else was about to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of like a post-credit scene, isn't it, with the Marvel films? I'm sure something happened over the last couple of years with The Fiend, something like that. And me and Harry might have missed it because we'd switched off a bit. A bit too early, maybe. Yeah,
tricked you real good. So that is the end of the greatest wrestling show ever. I think that was a pretty good show all around. I think we had a variety of wrestlers, Matt Hardy and Twice, obviously, a variety of gimmicks. We had all the major titles defended, a number of different eras covered, a number of different types. It wasn't all just quality wrestling matches. I think that was a good little show. If I'd have gone to that show, I think I would have described it as the greatest wrestling show ever.
Yeah, how could you not?
Exactly, yeah. So that is the end of Series 1. Series 2, as we've mentioned before, we're going to have a go at and see if we can make it work. Some sort of elimination-style tournament of, I think, did we suggest, should we say 8 wrestlers, which would be 7 matches in total, or 16 wrestlers would be 15 matches in total? Maybe do that, I think.
Yeah,
we'll figure out in episode 1 who's going to be involved, and between episode 1 and 2, figure out how we're going to make it actually work. But should we start that from next week? Straight into it?
Right. Yeah, love it.
Right. I hope you enjoyed Series 1, guys. Let us know, comment on anything on Facebook, or we are on Twitter now. I haven't really done much with it, but you can find us, I'm sure, by searching for the greatest wrestling show ever on Twitter. Probably should set up some other social media channels, but I'm sure I'll get around to it at some point.